All yours.
All right, the first item here is introduction of Peter and Steve Simon. And if you want, if they want to get in here and introduce themselves, go to it.
Chair Wiggins, do you want to take roll first so that the public will know who is in this meeting?
I got it from Lorraine that as a result of the screen here that they could get it, but we can go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll start with me, Clyde Wiggins, Chairman of the Board.
Chuck Hobenick, Vice Chair.
Don Roth.
Caitlin,
Caitlin Mercer.
Mayor.
Linda Olson.
Okay. And Cheryl? We didn't get this down, Cheryl.
Yep, Cheryl Link.
Okay. All right. Is that good enough for rolling? Roll
Yeah,
call.
just in case
Joe
people are
Anderson.
just calling in, then it makes it easier for them.
Gotcha.
Joe Anderson as well.
Joe
Okay.
Anderson. Oh, yeah.
Ah. Sorry, Joe. All right. At this time, I'd like to have a motion for approval of the February 11th, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Don. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Hi.
Motion's been approved. All right, the first item on the agenda is the Water and Sewer Board Public Forum. Do we have anybody that has indicated they wish to address this board? Have you heard anybody from anybody, Lorraine?
It doesn't look like anybody's got their hand up.
All right. Well, then in that case.
Okay, hold on. One hand just came up.
Okay,
And it looks like the last four digits, there we go, is 1059. You have been unmuted.
This is actually board member John Moore. I'm just having trouble getting in without on the muted line, so I'm not, apologize for the difficulties, but I am here. That was it.
welcome aboard, John.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Well, if we have no other anybody from the public wanting to get in here on the public forum, we'll move to have Peter go ahead with his presentation that he wanted to go with.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Chair. If I could first, I'd like to go back to introducing myself and Steve Simon as well. So this is my first board meeting as the new Director of Utilities for the City of Englewood. I've come to the board meeting a couple times over the past year and a half or so. Just a little background, I've been with the Director of South Platte Water Renewal Partners since August of 2018. And then in March of this year, an agreement was entered into between the City of Littleton and the City of Englewood that allowed me to diversify my duties to be the director of both the City of Englewood Utilities as well as South Platte Water Renewal Partners. So as soon as that happened, this whole COVID thing occurred, and we immediately went into remote working, and so it's been an interesting first 8 weeks as a utilities director. But I'm very excited to be here, very excited to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over the last 9 months, and I'll do that after I introduce Steve Simon. So Steve is the new Deputy Director of Engineering for Utilities, and this is his third week. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Steve just to give 2 minutes of background to introduce himself so that you can see who the new people are in the utilities department.
Thank you, Peter. You share my taste in blue shirts and blue ties. This wasn't planned, but my name is Steve Simon. As Peter mentioned, coming up on my third week here. Prior to that, I had spent just over 5 years with the City of Aurora Water Department, where I was principal engineer over their asset management program, and then the latter part was the planning services manager over the asset management, modeling, long-range planning and GIS team. Prior to that, I had spent 11 years in Southern California with the San Diego County Water Authority, doing a variety of preliminary engineering, facility planning, and other feasibility level analysis. Really excited to be here. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do really great things, and looking forward to building up a great engineering division here.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Welcome to the city of Englewood and Littleton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Olson.
All right, can you still hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I wasn't, yeah, okay. So Steve is the first of a few key hires that's we're planning to make in utilities that are actually part of that MOU with the city of Littleton. So the structure that they agreed to was a deputy director structure. So I have 4 deputy directors at South Platte Water Renewal Partners, and I'm hiring 2 deputy directors for utilities, and one manages the engineering division, which really means build up the engineering division. And a lot of the things that you'll see in the presentation tonight are projects and programs that need to be executed by an engineering division, and then a deputy director of operations and maintenance. And so that recruitment is ongoing right now. We also had a recruitment for a business support specialist. So this is more of a someone who can help with administration and finance and those kinds of things. And we actually had a really good candidate we interviewed last week, and she accepted today. So we anticipate having that individual on board on May 26th, which will help us a lot with a lot of our budget and administrative support and invoices and just all things that are agreements and all these kinds of things. So we're really excited to have her as well. So we're starting to build things up. It's an exciting time, and I think that the next thing I'll roll into is the master plan. So let me share my screen, and let me make sure I got the right screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Interesting.
So the master plan is a process that we started about September of last year. We entered into an agreement with Hazen & Sawyer, who's a consultant who, wastewater consultant who does this kind of work. And over the course of that 7 or 8 months, we have done a complete overarching analysis of the water and sewer systems and programs. And from that information, we develop a long-term planning document that we can then build a capital plan from, and we can build a ultimately build rates and fees from as well. I want to welcome and thank the consultant that helped, and this is Hazen. And so Julie Barry was the lead on collections and distribution. I think she's on the call as well. Steve Price was the source water and treatment expert. By & Associates was a sub-consultant that did all the modeling. So there's a lot of modeling that goes into this so that we have a digital representation of the water and wastewater systems. Brian Oldham was the PM, and Brian's on the call. And then Roger Austin was the principal. And so through a great team and great support on the city side, Conad Curry, who many of you know, was the PM on the city side. And Maria DeAndre and I helped from a more of a leadership and guidance of the project as a whole. So with that, I'm going to get right into the presentation. And so the way we did this, so this is a presentation I actually presented to council on April 13th. And I'm going to walk through the same slide deck that I did with the council for the Water and Sewer Board, with a little bit of updates of some of the work that we've done from a rate and fee perspective over the last month or so. And if you would like to stop me to ask questions along the way, please let me know. There's a break point between water and sewer that might be a good spot to stop as well, but I'll pause along the way, and if people have questions, you can ask them along the way. So let's All right. Now why is this not going? Sorry. My screen is not advancing. Okay. I'm getting a lot of beeps. Huh. It was just working. Pardon me for a second here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the overall project approach, which was we took a risk-based approach. And so what that means is we looked at essentially likelihood of failure and consequence of failure for major pieces of infrastructure to determine what was the most what were the most important things to focus on. We did the drinking water system. We'll go through an overview and the findings and the recommendation. We did the sewer and the wastewater system. We'll do the same thing, overview, findings, and recommendations, and then summary of a 15-year budget cost. Stormwater was also part of this project, but that was on a different schedule track, and so that has been completed, and they've moved forward with more of the financing plan. So the stormwater system's probably about 3 months ahead of where the water and the sewer is right now. So our project approach was we analyzed available data. So there's all kinds of available data that city staff provided to the consultants, supplemented that with field information that we collected, whether it's verification or on-site observation. We facilitated workshops with city staff. There was a number of, I think we had probably 5 or 6 workshops where we went through results and then gave direction to the consultant in terms of how to proceed with the plan. We evaluated major assets. So this is the first comprehensive plan that I've been able to uncover for water and sewer that the city has done. And so we could do a complete comprehensive plan, which goes all the way down to the smallest pipes, but those are really expensive. So the way you typically handle planning is to do the big stuff first, figure out where the issues are, and then start to dive into the specifics on the smaller things so that we don't spend a bunch of money chasing down something that really doesn't matter in the long run. So that's why we did the major assets. We then ultimately summarized that information and developed the findings and estimated costs. And you can see the pipe sizes that we stopped at. So for the water model, we went down to 8 inches in diameter. The system has a lot of pipes that are smaller than 8 inches in diameter, but we can get a skeletonized network of the major system with the 8-inch. And then we did condition assessment on the major transmission. So these are the things that if they spring a leak, we've got a real problem. Sewer model, similar type of approach. We did 15 inches on that. You can see the timeline there. We started in September, and we're actually now, I should have updated this slide, I apologize. We're into May and talking to Water and Sewer Board. So we basically split the results into 2 things, projects and programs. So projects are a one-time fix to a building, to a pump system, to a motor. That's a project, and then a program is an ongoing year-over-year program that addresses a system component or a utility-wide component. So when we see the results, you'll see them split into those 2 categories. We essentially looked at them in 3 different timing categories. One is high priority. So these are associated again with that risk. So if you look at the diagram there, we want actually no numbers up in the upper right where the red is. So that means you've got a high likelihood of failure and a high consequence of failure. So that could be something where a pump station fails and then we can't get water to our reservoirs. Those are the projects that we really want to attack first. And so those are categorized in a 1 to 2 year time frame. The medium priority are that next layer down where we could probably go into a few more years without addressing them immediately, but eventually if we don't get to them, we could end up with some kind of a problem. And then the long range are the more things that are okay now, but if we don't plan to address them in the future, then we're going to result in some kind of larger problem in the future. So that's the general overview of how we did the planning. So here's the the water plan itself. Actually, do we have any questions?
Not so far.
Okay, I will keep moving. So the approach was, again, I talked about reviewing available data. You can see the diagram there is the city's water network. There was wherever there was missing data from the GIS, we actually have a decent GIS, a geographic information system model. And so we supplemented with missing data into the GIS model, then subsequently developed a hydraulic model for the system. So that's, again, that digital network that we can run scenarios on to understand if we put a high user in a particular part of the industrial area, what does it do to the system around that user? So that capability is something that we, at least through this process, built the skeleton version of, and then we'll ultimately, over time, build out to a complete network as time and budget allows. We evaluated processes and major equipment, assessed the major transmission mains, and then categorize the risks associated with all of those and develop recommendations. So our overviews. This is a general overview of the major components of the water system. You can see all the way to the south, that's McLellan Reservoir, McLellan Pump Station. That's where our raw water goes. McLellan Reservoir is actually a shared reservoir with Centennial Water and Sanitation District, which essentially serves Highlands Ranch, has capacity in that reservoir, and we actually lease water to Centennial Water and Sanitation District, and that reservoir is how that water is transitioned or transferred through. The pump station gets the water in, and then you can see the Union Ave pump station. That's where we pump directly from the plant into the water plant. You can see the Allen Water Treatment Plant right here is that's the main water supply plant for the city. It's a 28 MGD capacity plant that generally runs at the peak has gone down a little bit over the past few years, and it runs about 10. So there's a lot of excess capacity in the water plant, which is actually, it's not a bad thing to have capacity. It allows for redundancy, which is a good thing. You can see some of the other tanks that we have, and then we have a couple of distribution system pump stations in the northeast part of town.
Peter, can I stop
Yes.
you for a second? I
Yes.
noticed that Cheryl's hand is up.
Okay.
Thank you, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
A slide or two back, Peter. I believe you were talking about stress testing the system. I think it was on this plan. Yeah, you were saying, as your example, perhaps a new entity moves into the industrial area, and in order to know if the system can withstand the, standard deviation of likely, water usage. What is it you're doing? It sounded like stress testing. Is that what you do, and what's the frequency?
Yeah, we don't, stress testing is probably a way to categorize it. It's essentially, it's a scenario modeling. And so what we can do is we can plug a new demand into the system.
Right.
If we're plugging that, if we're plugging a substantial demand into a 6-inch pipe, then what happens is we see the velocities go way up in the pipe, and then we realize that they can't get the appropriate flow to get the pressure to that customer. And then what you'll see is you'll see how far that'll chase back into the model. And so if there's a redevelopment site where the adjacent, where this is important is where if you have a redevelopment site and you have an adjacent main that could be 60 or 70 years old, that's 6-inch, and then there's a new user that wants to go vertical and have a large demand, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that that user who's creating that impact on the system is upsizing segments of the system that are attributable to them.
I get that. And so when you're planning for lifetime of the different components of all your systems, are you keeping does your planning for include the gamut of testing and the loads created by testing in addition to normal use over time
Yeah,
and that growth curve?
yeah, I would say that, yes, we're in the infancy of that.
Okay.
You start with that model, and then what we have to do is we have to predict the future in terms of growth.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's always this, kind of this back and forth. We know we have the defined area. So city center redevelopment is an area that who knows what it could be, but it's an area that's likely going to change.
Yeah.
And so we can understand if a redeveloper comes in and says, we want to install a hotel, we can see what that demand change is on the system and then see what the associated impacts of the system are.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Lorraine.
Great question. Okay, the treatment system itself. This is one change from the council PowerPoint that I did. This arrow was actually pointed in the wrong direction. So for those of you who are paying close attention to the detail, this arrow has moved to point to the pump station. It was pointing to this commercial building. So I fixed that. It was my fault for missing that. But essentially we have a Union Ave pump station where we pump from, this is where we can do our direct flow rights. So we take water directly out of the plant, pump it up to the pond and then into the Allen treatment plant. And then that comes out of the Allen treatment plant and then out to the distribution system. Like I was saying before, demands are trending down. So if you look at the max day demand, you can see in 2010, it was over 12. And then if you just do a general trend line, you can see that that's slowly going down. A lot of that is associated with water efficient fixtures. A lot of organizations are seeing this. We are not a high growth community. And so high growth communities see demands going up every year because they're adding 1,000 houses to their service area. We don't have that. So what we have is the existing community that's either redeveloping or fixing things and putting in more efficient fixtures, or has gotten smarter about how they're utilizing water during the irrigation season to implement conservation. And so a lot of people have done a lot of education as it relates to how to xeriscape their yards and things like that. And so I think that's where we're seeing that trend. That's our best estimate of what's causing that.
And we have Cheryl's hand up again.
Yes. Oh, let me go back.
Thank you. That's a great estimate. I mean, it makes logical sense. Does your staff, is there anyone on your staff? You have such a talented technically trained staff. So do you have anybody on staff that's actually conducting research on any other correlations that could have a sizable impact on driving the trend here, so that your forecasting gets tighter and tighter over time? I know I'm thinking of that young woman who led the writing of that. I think it was a grant or something that we got a big award for last year.
Yeah, so that was Anna Schrader. So she's with, so this is where we get into the two different departments thing. So because Anna is part of South Platte Water Renewal Partners, I can't utilize that staff on the utilities side. And so really what Steve is here for is I want to build that same capability in terms of an engineering division on the utilities side to match that same kind of work that you're seeing on the South Platte side.
Okay, that helps. Thank you, Peter.
Yep. And that'll come up a little bit later in the staffing discussion. So I can talk a little bit more about staffing and when I get to that slide. Okay, major findings. So there are good things about our system. There's definitely some strengths to it. So the source water, we actually have a really good water rights portfolio. We've got just in the last 2 months that I've been engaged with our water rights engineer and water rights attorney. We have a lot of senior water rights that are from the 1860s that have really strong yields. And that's a really important thing. And considering where we are in the South Platte Basin, they're very valuable water rights and they have high yield. So that's a really, really great thing that supplies these two pump stations, the Union Ave and the McLellan pump station. Our water treatment plant has, like I said, operates below capacity. It complies with drinking water regulations. It has chlorine and UV light, which is a disinfection process that creates multiple barriers for disinfection. So what that does is that ensures that the product that we actually send out to all of our customers, that all of our customers drink every day, is of high quality, meets our standards, and is disinfected so that it doesn't have any waterborne diseases or anything that are associated with non-disinfected water. And then we have done an excellent job extending useful life by maintenance, to the point where I think we've extended a number of things beyond what their useful life is, but they're still making them work. But that's something that you'll see as we talk through the results, that we're starting to get to that point where I think we're pushing some things a little bit far. But we have extended a lot of that equipment and its useful life. Distribution system itself, we have great pressure for customers, which is really good. Even with the age of the network itself does give good pressure to customers. The fire flow requirements are there, which is a really important thing. And then we have that good GIS inventory. So here are some things to the left. That's the first part of the treatment process in the Allen Water Plant. So essentially what that does is that those plates block flocculation that's floating in that's floating up and then knocks it down, and then we collect that out. That's how we take particulate and contaminants out of the water. And then if you go all the way over to the right, that's the UV disinfection system. That's using ultraviolet light. And what that does is it actually disrupts any cellular walls of anything that is still potentially alive in the water and basically kills it. So on the source water side, deferred maintenance is, while we are maintaining many of the assets to keep them working, we have a lot of deferred maintenance on critical equipment. And that really comes down to the fact that the water utility has run pretty lean for many, many years. And I think that by doing that, it starts to catch up when equipment becomes 30 and 40 and 50 years old. And so I think that that's one of our major issues that we want to address. There are 2 source water pump stations that are aging and at high risk of failure. I actually sent a communication out a couple weeks ago. We've had 2 pump failures on the McLellan pump station. And with one of those pump failures, because of the time of that it actually failed, it failed in April. And because of that, we were unable to fully utilize one of our available water rights. And then we were also unable to pull water out of that was in Free River because there was no call on the river. So we were unable to pull water and put it in McLellan and then sell it to Centennial Water and Sanitation District. So that equated to about $5,000 a day for 6 days. And so there's real impact when these pumps are down. And right now we've got one of them pulled. We fixed one of them that failed a couple months ago and put that one in, and then immediately went to the next one and pulled the other one out, and we're sending that one off to get fixed. But that becomes the frequency of that is what's starting to really indicate that this pump station needs an overhaul. The Big Dry Creek source is a project that it's a very hard source, and it has a T-norm, which is technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material. And so that's just basically, there's clay down in the upper Dry Creek Basin that erodes down, and then when we pick the water up, we take it out, we concentrate it, and there's just naturally occurring radioactive nuclides out there, and when you concentrate it, it makes that go up. So that's something that we definitely deal with from a regulatory perspective. And then the chemical conveyance and storage systems just need to be updated. They've been in place for years and they just need some help. So here's some examples of some things. We've got definitely some very corroded just equipment that like I said, it's just getting tired and old. And then this panel to the right, and this I said something to I said to council, this is one of the things that actually makes me a little bit nervous, is we have some old programmable logic controllers and old electrical systems that are actually outdated. And when they start to fail, then the brains of the water plant, for lack of a better term, actually starts to fail. And so this is an area that if there's a priority, that this is one of those areas that we need to get some projects moving to update our electrical system and then our SCADA and integration system. The water treatment plant, one of the things that we hear from members of the community is the hardness of the water, and that's because we don't have a system to remove hardness. That's something that we'll look at as one of our proposed projects. The control system I talked about, chemical feed systems, we have a number of them that lack redundancy, and so what that means is if something fails, we don't have the ability to feed the necessary chemical. And so you want to have systems that have redundancy, so if you have a failure or you have to take it offline for maintenance, there's a parallel system that we can feed the necessary chemicals for. Space is an issue. There's not a lot of space for office and maintenance and just utilities as a whole. Utilities is pretty spread out, and the office, there's very few offices in the Civic Center. There's almost no offices at the water plant, and so we have this challenge as it relates to, as we staff up to meet the needs of the water system. We also have the operations complex need in order to be able to house that staff, and then also have the necessary equipment to maintain the systems. And we have few formal programs for scheduled assessments and maintenance. So what we do is we do a lot of react to the problem as opposed to systematic, system-wide assessment and maintenance, preventative, and then you ultimately want to get to predictive maintenance. We're really on reactive maintenance. We react to issues on a daily basis. There's a couple pictures. Here's the other difference in the council presentation. These two tanks were flipped in terms of their labeling. And there is irony in the sense that there's two tanks on this picture. The issue is they're two different chemicals. So when we talk about lack of redundancy, and this is actually something that the plant operators deal with, is you have to time the delivery of the chemical such that you can order a full tank, get it in, and then top off the tank. And when you're in higher demand season, that timing is really tight. And then if there's a disruption to supply, we end up with a potential issue there. So doubling up tanks is a thing that definitely helps with resiliency.
Peter, we have Cheryl with the question.
Yes.
Shocking. Thank you. Is establishing a system of redundancy for the aluminum sulfate and the polymer tanks at Allen, is it something that we're going to see as a tier 1 request maybe in a couple of weeks to a council as we look at the capital improvement plans? Is that level of information or request going to come to us? Because this seems like a high need, as does the need from the aging pump stations you mentioned at Union, etc.
So I think, so we're going to come back on the 22nd with the 22nd of June with the water and sewer.
Oh.
So we're kind of on a parallel track.
Okay.
And so it's going to look a little bit different than what you're seeing with the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 for the rest of the capital plan. I think our tier 1 is that timing of years. So it will be in the program to the degree that we can afford it. And so that's the piece that we're working on right now. So you'll see, I'll go through all the results on this, and you'll see that there's a lot of costs.
Yeah, but if we don't replace the pump stations, I mean, that's the core of our functionality. So
Absolutely.
whether we can afford it or not, we need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're working on is we're now looking at, so we want to do all these things, but we're not sure that we can, but there are major things that we need to do, like the electrical, like the pump stations. And part of that comes down to, are there financing plans that we can do? Can we we're looking at federal financing that we'll talk about on the 22nd as well, to be able to package some of these projects. And there's actually really favorable rates and payback terms that we can look at. So the thing that we're working on now is how do we pay for all this?
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yep. Water distribution, you can see we looked at 8 and 18. There's 2 pump stations. They are very old as well. And in actuality, one of them doesn't run that often. So we're actually going to do an assessment to see if it's really needed. Interconnects with Denver is that is a great lifeline for us if we can get it in place, because our demands at 10 is like it's like a large user to Denver on their system. So they work in hundreds of millions of gallons a day. So if we had some situation where we had some significant issue with our system, we would want to get these interconnects in place as an emergency backup system, as one way to create system resiliency. We still have over 1,200 flat rate unmetered accounts. So these have no meters, so you can't. So they just pay a flat rate every month and use whatever water they want. I was actually surprised by this when I took over utilities, because the other districts and municipalities I've worked at got rid of these years ago, and so I was surprised when we still had them here. And so that's something that we definitely want to work on, because flat rate accounts, I think most places got rid of those, gosh, by the 90s. And so this is definitely a legacy thing. Assessment and maintenance, like I said, few formal programs. I talked a little bit about redevelopment policies, and then the big one is an estimated 4,000 to 8,000 lead service lines.
Peter,
Yes.
we have Mayor Olson asking a question.
Yes.
I'm sure you're going to know what I'm going to say, because I say it all the time, but I just don't get this water meter thing. And in the 10 years I've been on water and sewer board, I've never figured it out why this board has not insisted that we do what the state has required us to do. I mean, other than that, people on, just people we know don't have water meters and they don't want one. It's the easiest thing we can do to be in compliance and have available grant money. Am I wrong about that?
Are you asking the board or you're asking me?
No, I'm asking you, but then I'm asking the board, can we step up to the plate and do the right thing this year and start making sure we just shift all of this?
In my years in the water industry, I think this is an important thing. This is how you start to really shift the way your customers engage with their water use. And so if we want to go to, eventually it would be great to go to an automated AMI, automated meter infrastructure. So basically what that does is people can get real-time data use on their water usage, and so they can track if they get a leak or if they want to be conscious of whether they're watering too much. It really is the last place I worked, we're in the process of implementing it, and the dashboards that customers could use to actually track their water uses was great. Additionally, our digging into the rate model has shown that the flat rate metered to unmetered accounts are probably not getting the best. They could probably save money by going to a meter. And so there's a really, from a financial burden for the customer does better if there's a meter on their water, because then they have control over it. So yes, I think it's an important thing, but again, I would, that's my recommendation. It ultimately comes down to.
So I don't know, the rest of the board can weigh in, but I would love to see what a plan would look like to get us to zero being on flat rate and what's legitimate. We thought that every time a house turned over that we'd do it, but that obviously is not working.
Yeah, I think that, so one of the things I've got Steve working on is with the Water Now Alliance, which I know Cheryl's very active in. We have talked to Lindsay about, with the Water Now, about packaging some kind of a project that could address flat rate meter accounts, unmetered accounts, because that right there gets to conservation. When you have metered accounts, you can definitely encourage conservation through rate structure. And so we're exploring with her what the possibility is for a grant to help with some of that. Part of the challenge is, of those 1,200 flat rate accounts, how many of them have lead service lines? And then how does that piece of it get incorporated into the replacement? And how do we fund that? And so it's not impossible. We just have some hurdles we have to get through, and I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Mayor Olson, this is
Yeah.
Clyde. I was going to give you a little history on that. According to Stu, back in the old days, they were going to buy attrition. It would work out to about 100 a year. And I was under the impression we were probably down to about 800 meters, unmetered people. But as I see, they show 1,200. But even at that, talking about it, half of those are people that die and the property changes hands, and then the other one is real estate when the house is sold and it changes out. So that was one of the things involved. As you said, Peter, you have somebody who's studying it, and I would say that would be a factor that we could sell to the unmetered people, of which I am one. You could.
You and Randy Penn back in the day.
Yeah, Randy. But anyway, that would be if you could sell us a factor that how much it cost to install it, and something like that they could know that this is how much it costs out of their pocket when they put it in here, and roughly by the size of the lot, what you would anticipate the saving would be, because we have heard that we should be saving some by going off of flat rate and going on a meter. So that would be a case, just for that matter.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me saying, I think we had set it up so that the meter would be rolled into the fees every month, so that people didn't have to pay out of their pocket either, so that it was taken care of, and the amount of money that was saved actually paid off the whole thing, and it was very easy to do, which is what we did in our house when we moved into this one, because it didn't have a meter either.
Well, the trouble is you don't have old timers like us around. See?
Hey, I'm an old timer.
Yeah.
I just want to see us do this, but anyway, I'm distracting us. Go on.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Peter.
So what's the likelihood then of us doing, well, sorry, never mind. I got distracted, never mind.
Okay,
I have a question,
sure.
Caitlin. Do we have any background as to why there's so many unmetered people, like, in the first place? Is it just that's how we had set it up initially, and then as time has gone on, everyone has turned to being metered? Is that what it is?
Yeah, when the system was originally installed way back when, it was an unmetered system. And that's a lot of water systems. They were unmetered. And then over time, meters were a way to tie usage to bills, and then I don't know how the change has occurred over the decades, but this is the residual amount that's left. I think it's 1272 is the total.
It seems like it's been at that level for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't do many a year.
We had a big push when we were supposed to be abiding by the state regulations, and we did a big voluntary push and people went on to meters, but then it just, the rest didn't come. And nobody's watching this when people's homes change over. I mean, I don't know, do you get a notice, Peter, when someone sells their house to go and put a meter on their house?
I think we do.
Do you?
I'd have to verify that, but I know we do changes every year.
Yeah.
But I couldn't tell you. We could probably get the data on that. Whatever it is we're not doing enough. If the goal is to eliminate flat rate unmetered accounts, it's we're down to this last group, and there's some kind of a program that's implemented to bring everybody to a meter. Which frankly, if you go, I don't know of another place on the Front Range in the metro area that still has unmetered accounts. So so maybe they're out there, but I'm unaware of them. And I worked at Castle Rock, Parker, and Aurora, and I don't know of any that we had that were unmetered. Okay. One last thing I wanted to say on the estimated 4,000 to 8,000 lead service lines. We do that based on age of the home. It's 1962 and newer, has the possibility of being a lead service line. And so, you know, much of Englewood was built in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And so that's why there are so many. The variability is because we don't have a comprehensive inventory. So the first thing to do on that program is to really get a sense of where we have the lead service lines versus where we don't. Here's a couple pictures of those pump stations. You can see they're, again, corrosion and just, you know, they're just getting tired. Okay, so that results in the project recommendation. So this is the group of projects that out of the assessment are the high priority ones. And you can see it totals a lot of money. It's about $12 million. And so the pump stations and the electrical upgrades, those are the first two that I talked about that were that I think are most significant, are also most expensive. The distribution system pump stations, we can actually probably work with those because, again, we want to do an assessment to make sure that we're doing the right improvements there. Big Dry Creek diversion, that project is about 60% done. The last thing that needs to be done is there's vaults on either end that need to be installed, and then the inflatable weir that diverts the water. Chemical feed systems, that's some of that work that we talked about, Cheryl, or Councilmember Wink, sorry. Emergency interconnects with Denver, that's, we talked about that. Some of these other ones are just some smaller projects that are actually just important projects that we need to get done. Treatment water softening assessment. So that's an assessment of what it would take to actually bring down our hardness so that we can plan for some kind of a capital improvement down the road. Same thing with this operations complex and space study. That's to figure out what we potentially need to really equip the utilities department with the necessary space and equipment to be able to maintain the systems well into the future. We actually knocked this number down. I apologize for not making that adjustment. And then elevated flume structural assessment. I was actually just talking to Dave Chapman today, and apparently one of these flumes is, so these are flumes that bridge like ditches and things like that. And one of them has a pretty significant leak in it. And so apparently these are in pretty rough shape. So we're gonna assess them and fix them as necessary. So this is the medium priority. This is that 3 to 5 year range. This is so as the second phase of that pump station improvements. Again, that's going to depend on what the results of the optimization analysis of how we move water through the system goes. Second phase of electrical and controls upgrades. This Hamden Avenue transmission main rehabilitation, that's actually in conjunction with a storm drainage project. So we'll make sure, I don't know the exact timing of when that project's going to occur, but we'll make sure that we have this funding available so that when we're in there fixing that street along in front of the hospital, we can replace this line. This line has actually had a number of breaks on it, so it's a good, and it's right next to the hospital, so we want to fix it. More chemical feed, zone 1 and 2 pressure reducing valves. That's just to help regulate pressure between zones. And then, like I said, just a few other smaller projects. And then long range projects, overhead tank replacements. We need to be planning for that. We do regular maintenance and condition assessment on those, but eventually we're going to have to look at some kind of a rehab or replacement. So we just have that plugged in the next 6 to 15 years. A softening project, and that again will depend on what we decide, what council and the water and sewer board decide as it relates to what's an acceptable level of hardness for our water. That operations complex expansion, we anticipate that in that 6 to 15 year range. Depending again on that depends on need and timing. Some storage tanks, there's source water projects, and this is our mountain system. So this master plan did not look at anything upstream of Chatfield. So we have an entire mountain system that's largely connected to Denver, and we have projects that are associated with that. So that's a separate analysis that needs to occur once we get through all this. But we have money in there for those projects because they do come up here and there. The rest of them are pretty, I think they're pretty straightforward. So programs. So these are the ongoing programs that we should put in place to ensure ongoing maintenance and updating of our system. And so I'll run through those quickly. On-call emergency services contracts. So basically that's to get contracts in place with a couple of contractors so that if we have an emergency, we can immediately call them and we know we've gone through the procurement process through an RFP and have rates already set. That's more of a business process that we want to make sure that we get implemented. And then we want to make sure that we have funding available in case those emergencies do pop up. Meter installation for non-metered accounts. We have a annualized program of $280,000 a year. That could change based on the timing of how quickly or how quickly we want to implement that program. Emergency repair projects themselves in the distribution system. Transmission main inspections, valve inspection and exercising. So one of the ways you keep the system running long-term is you do a regular rotation of valve exercising so they don't freeze up and then you break off the nut and then we're sitting there trying to shut off a line because there's a water break and we can't because the valve broke. Hydrant flushing and testing. We did hydrant flushing actually of the system just a few weeks ago. What we want to do is we want to get to a point where we're being more strategic about that flushing so that we can actually use the model to help predict where we should open hydrants and close valves. GIS system update. Again, the digital system is so important for us to be able to understand how to really, we understand it on a desktop level as opposed to in the field. And then that water model, the more we can build out that water model, the better off we'll be. Medium priority programs. So these are trying to get up and running in the next 3 to 5 years. So this is a water main replacement. This is one I know that it was discussed last night. This is the one that's in complement to what the Public Works wants to do with a street replacement program. And so this timing will probably shift in order to ensure that between the water main, the greater than 12-inch and then the less than 12-inch, these two first numbers, that we get that paired up and timed with a comprehensive program with Public Works. And so the timing of this may shift a little bit, but it's something that we're working together on. GAC is a treatment process, so that replacement, valve and meter replacement, asset management, that's how we can plan for our systems into the future, and you look at what it does is it tells you how many times you've worked on it, how much it's cost, how much the repair costs were, the frequency of the repairs. And when you start to fix things too much, then you realize it's time to replace it. So that's what that system does. If there's anything else in here that, no, so those, and then the last long range is talked about the lead service line replacements, advanced metering infrastructure. And so those two are, I think those are longer range goals. The reason why we have the lead service line replacement in the 6 to 15 years is because we're tracking the legislation on that. And right now, the size of our community, it's not required, but all national trends are it's gonna get to us. And so we want to be planning for it so that we either get ahead of the regulation, or when the regulation actually does hit, we're prepared and ready to implement. So the last thing is some policy considerations, and we'll just run through those. One is universal metering, so we talked about that. Redevelopment standards, that we talked a little bit about that as well. Lead service lines, we talked about that. Main replacement rate, that's in conjunction with Public Works and what makes the most sense. And then water hardness. So these, so we've covered all these. So these are the main things that over the course of the next 6 months to a year, we'll be working with the board and council to figure out what is the, what's an acceptable rate and what's an acceptable cost to implement these kinds of programs. So that's a lot. That's the water master plan. So I can pause here and open up to some questions, or I can go on through sewer and just do questions at the end. What would you?
What's the pleasure of the board? Does anybody have any questions?
I think you can go on.
Okay. All right, the sewer master plan, it's a little less complex because the system's less complex. So again, same kind of approach, available data, updated GIS. We did actually do some gauging data, developed a sewer model, assessed those larger interceptors, did the risks, and developed recommendations. So this is a skeletonized network of our major sewer infrastructure mains. So essentially we have 82 miles of mains, 1,600 manholes, 6,500 sewer accounts. Flow comes to South Platte Water Renewal Partners. And then actually a small part goes to Metro, which is in the northeast part of the city. There's a lot of concrete, and ductile iron is the main things that are impacted by the corrosive environment. There's also a lot of vitrified clay pipe, which vitrified clay pipe is fragile and prone to cracks. At the same time, if it's not disturbed, it will last for decades. And so the thing to understand with vitrified clay pipe is not necessarily a bad thing. It's only a bad thing is if it gets disturbed and is cracked. So here's the I think the telling picture with the sanitary system. So our sanitary system is all collections. So there are no lift stations, which is actually a good thing. So it's all gravity, which means that the program costs are generally less when you don't have lift stations. But what you can see is the south, third of the city is actually covered by a different district. So that's the South Englewood Sanitation District. So when there's been questions about where's the city sewer versus where's the South Englewood Sanitation District, you can see why, because a large part of the community actually is served by that district. And so really what we're talking about today is the part that's strictly served by the city of Englewood. You can also see that beyond just the South Englewood Sanitation District, there's 5 other entities that have sewer mains that are going through the city. So there's a lot of different, there's a couple different service providers and other entities that have mains in the city. But the main thing is really just recognizing it's this north 2/3 is what we're looking at. So really some of the good things is our large diameter interceptors are they're sized properly, so they have available capacity. It's a gravity system, like I said. That's great because they're easier to inspect and maintain. Pump stations, you know, like any other pump station, they break down. The thing with sanitary pump stations is they're dealing with sewage, and so they break down more. Current city, the city has CCTV equipment, which is good. Again, another GIS database is actually in pretty good shape. And then we have the ability to plan and execute our maintenance activities through a CMMS system, computerized maintenance management system. So we looked at, again, greater than 15-inch. The problem with the CCTV data is it's very reactive. It's not programmatic. It's not system-wide and systematic in terms of its assessment. There is no formal inspection for rehab for manholes. So as manholes start to deteriorate because they're concrete and it's that corrosive environment with hydrogen sulfide, we don't have anything to stay on top of them in terms of a program. And then again, it's very reactive. The formal programs aren't in place. So here's some examples of what you see in terms of deterioration. See some cracks. So this vitrified clay pipe actually looks good until there's a crack in it. And then where you get collapses, that becomes a problem. And then these manholes, you can see it's that interior that starts to deteriorate. And sometimes that concrete becomes so deteriorated, it turns into like a powder. So you'll notice that there are no sewer system projects. And that's because we did not find any major key projects that were necessary. But that's also because we don't have a really good comprehensive CCTV inventory. So really the first thing to do with the sewer system is do a complete inventory of the system. We think we can get through it in less than a year. And what that'll do is that'll tell us where the real problems are. Right now we're kind of flying blind as it relates to the sanitary system, but with a CCT inspection program, we can really know right out of the gate what the issue is. And then so a year from now, we can understand if there are real problems with some major interceptors, that maybe the crown of the pipe is deteriorating because of the hydrogen sulfide. And those are the kinds of things where you have these catastrophic collapses. But right now, until we get that inspection, we don't know. So that's really the first priority. And then you can see some of the other programs are very similar to what you saw in water. The other one here is the manhole inspections, but you can, when you're doing the lines, you're looking at the manholes too. 3 to 5 years is a formalized program. Again, this is the kind of thing that coordinates with the water and the sewer, so they're all being done at the same time. And then long term, it's really just more long-term modeling and assessment of the system itself. So sewer is a little more straightforward, smaller system, and not as complex. With the exception of South Platte Water Renewal Partners, which is a large regional facility that the city co-owns with Littleton, whereas the city of Englewood serves around 35,000 population, 33 to 35. South Platte Water Renewal Partners serves around 300,000 people between the city of Littleton, the city of Englewood, and 19 connector districts. 11 of those connector districts actually come through the city of Englewood, so the agreement is with the city of Englewood. It's actually something that we're looking at as part of the rate and fee study, is assessing all of those connector districts to ensure that we're charging the appropriate connection fees and the appropriate administrative charges, and we're trying to get them to be consistent because there are a lot of differences, and we want to streamline them and make them more consistent. But you can see generally so if you look at this, these are really big numbers, but you got to remember that these really big numbers are spread across 300,000 customers as opposed to 30,000. And then, so here's the summary of the 15-year for the water fund. And you can see that the grand total over 15 years is $167 million. A lot of that, this is and that doesn't include the entire lead service line program. It starts with about $20 million, which is $2 million a year for 10 years. If we accelerate that, it's going to be more. If we push it out, it's going to be less. It depends on how much is the city going to fund versus how much does the homeowner fund. There's a lot of policy decisions around that. But you can see there's a significant amount of need in the water fund side. The sewer fund is, it's 50-50 between the collection system over 15 years at 30 million and the treatment system over 30 million. So it's a little less, it's less of an impact. So staffing is something I talked about a little bit. One of the things that I think the utility has done for many years is operated extremely lean from a staffing perspective. And so you saw the projects and programs that need to be executed. And so right now I've hired Steve as the Deputy Director of Engineering. Steve has one engineer who predominantly focuses on development review and development inspection. There's a couple inspectors. So there's been no backfilling over the last 3 years of water resources engineer or a project manager or a project engineer. So that's a piece that has been it's been somewhat neglected for some time. And really to execute, you need staff to be able to execute. Even if we're going to contract all this out, you need staff to execute those programs and projects. And so on the operations side, I think the two key things that you'll see are we run really lean on operators. There's the way it's scheduled right now. Every day there's a couple hours every day where there's only one person at the water plant, and I'd like to get us away from that kind of staffing to the point where it's such a large complex system that it's really the kind of place, and it's such an important system. It's really the kind of place that realistically, I think minimum staffing should be no less than 2. And then maintenance, I showed you a number of pump stations, the flumes, talked about the flumes, the Allen plant itself. We have one maintenance person that handles all of that. And so I think part of the challenge is if that individual needed to replace something and needed 2 people, there's not even a second person from a maintenance person to help there. So I think building up some form of a maintenance team. We have one field maintenance individual who does more of building maintenance and mows the grass and plows the snow. But in terms of process maintenance on the water plant and the pump stations, there's one individual. And I think that that's an area where there's definitely a need. Talked about engineering. Water rights, I'm just going to talk a little bit about water rights, even though it wasn't really part of this plan. We have an extensive water rights portfolio. We have a number of very complex and important agreements that generate a significant amount of revenue to the water fund. And right now, and for the past several years, it has really been left up to the consultants to define that program and approach. And I think that just in the last 6 or 8 weeks that I've been interfacing with them, there's a lot of opportunity I think a lot of opportunity with our water rights portfolio. And there are things that we need to be looking at that are agreements that have been in place for decades that Englewood may not be getting what it's due based on those agreements. And so there's a significant amount of I think we should be paying more attention to this as part of an in-house engineering staff to guide our consultants, as opposed to the flip side, which is the consultants guiding Englewood and setting the direction and policy. I think we're making some progress. I know we're making them, I know I'm making them uncomfortable on the meetings every week or every other week, but I've essentially told them we're gonna approach this differently in the future, and they're reluctantly adjusting, I would say. So so staffing is actually kind of an important thing that is going to be integrated into all this, and it becomes one of those things that if we want to execute these things, we got to have the ability from a staffing perspective. So it's really that balance of you can run so lean, but then you can't accomplish things that need to be accomplished. Just in summary, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to eliminate the upper right with the reds, and I think you've heard about some of those today. We want to get more of the numbers down into the grays and the greens, and ultimately as much as we can in the green. And so it's really, we looked at this from a risk-based approach because I think that's the way you can most effectively and immediately address your most significant looming problems. And I think I think Hazen has done an excellent job with the help of staff to get almost a line in the sand today of here's what we think the systems are and where the needs are, and then we can move forward on how we actually execute the results of the plan. I think the one thing to keep in mind with master plans is they are very fluid documents. And so this will change, and we should be looking at it every year, and we should be looking at it multiple times in a year. And then about every 5 years is when you do a complete full reassessment again. That's generally the timing. But this is a really good first starting point so that we can actually start to conceptualize the magnitude of the issues. And that is the end of my presentation.
Well, you see it on there for questions. Does any board members got any questions for Peter? Apparently not. That was a good presentation.
Good.
You cut it down considerably from the thick packet of papers that came out.
Well, good. I appreciate that. I was afraid I was going too long.
No,
Mr. Wiggins,
yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Councilmember Mercier has her hand up.
Okay, Caitlin.
So I'm sorry if you covered this or not. I kind of started cooking while you were still talking. But I just wanted to ask if with the COVID-19 happening and budget becoming a growing issue, I know we made this master plan without that in mind. Do you see it impacting this master plan overall and getting the money to pay for everything?
So here's some of the work that we're doing on the rates and fees side is one of the things that we're looking at is we do comparisons to other metro area cities, and so we've compiled that comparison. And actually, I have a council request that was generated by Councilmember Wink that I'm working on the response on. That's going to have all this related to tap fees and rates. And the one thing about Englewood is, and this is independent of the timing of COVID, is from a monthly water sewer utility bill perspective, it is $11 cheaper per month in Englewood than the closest water sewer bill, which is Littleton. And then if you look at the average, it's about $26 less a month. So, and we looked at Denver and Lakewood and Aurora and Littleton, and then we went out a little bit, we went north to Fort Collins, and we went down to Parker. And so we wanted to get people that are locations that are really close, and we also wanted to get locations that are a little bit spread out so you could see the distribution. And across that whole distribution, I think the challenge is there. For years, Englewood has operated on a philosophy of keeping rates low. And I think a number of these other communities, whether it be through the drought and their water supplies going away, or needing to change from a groundwater supply to a surface water supply have, over the last 15 or 20 years, made that painful adjustment that is necessary to supply water in the metro area. Englewood's drivers are different. Our drivers aren't the need to switch from a groundwater system to a surface water system, because like I said, we have a very strong water portfolio. Our drivers are, we have an old system that needs maintenance and had deferred maintenance on it. So so to get back to your question about, does COVID impact this? I think there is, it's something to consider, but we've spent years getting to this point where we're not just a few dollars behind the average. We're $11 a month behind the lowest of any of our neighbors. And so, you could have a significant increase go into effect, and Englewood would still be the lowest. And so that's where I think the timing of COVID is definitely unfortunate, but if anything, the citizens of Englewood for decades have been getting a really favorable set of rates with the water and sewer systems that, like I said, I think is starting. I mean, this plan shows is somewhat starting to catch up. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. So we're making up the difference, or we're being able to pay for a majority of this by increasing our rates, essentially, correct?
Well, that's what we're working on now.
Okay.
So I think we have to recognize that we can't do this without some form of improvement in our revenue, and we're trying to determine what the best approach to that is, whether it's issuance of debt, whether it's looking at some of these other contracts that we have that are that we could potentially gain more revenue out of. And then ultimately, yes, I think the citizens of Englewood need to be prepared to basically come in line with the rest of the Front Range.
Anything further, Caitlin?
Nope, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member have any issues they want to discuss? How about the staff? Does the staff have anything they want to discuss?
Is this more general discussion?
Yes.
I had 3 other additional things that I just want to quickly comment on, or 4 actually. The first was I want to thank Maria DeAndre, who has served as an interim for 6 or 9 months as utilities director and was the staff liaison to this board, and definitely did a lot of work to help keep the water and sewer systems running during that period of time before I came on board. So I just wanted to publicly thank her for that.
Thank you.
We have a contract that we will be taking to council in the next, I think it's May, or I think it's June 1st. And it's with CDM, which is a consultant, and that's to respond to a resiliency requirement. It's an act that came out. It's a Water Infrastructure Act, American Water Infrastructure Act. And it basically is a requirement that we do an analysis and complete a plan that gets submitted to the federal government for our resiliency. And so that contract is with CDM, who submitted on an RFP and was the selected consultant. They have familiar with these plans. They've done them before. It's a routine thing, but it's something we have to do. I just wanted to notify the board that that's occurring. And then I talked a little bit about the water rights engineer and attorney, legal consultant support, and those contracts are due for renewal. And so I will be bringing those to the next board meeting in June, and then ultimately taking them to the city council for approval in mid-June as well. So just some contractual stuff that's coming up.
Okay. Anything more, Pete?
I think I've taken up enough of your time tonight.
We have Mayor Olson's hand up.
I did have a question, and maybe this would be for another time, but Peter, I don't know if you wanted to tell them about the BioBot study pilot that we're a part of, because it is fairly timely. And I
Sure.
don't know how much to read into that I don't know how it's being used as a study. I mean, it was referred to today on the Tri-County Health Department call.
Yeah, I saw, and I also saw the results that are coming out of it, and I think I agree with you. I'd love to understand some of the methodology.
Yeah.
But here's essentially what BioBot is. So
I just think they should know about it so that
Yeah.
if it gets referred to somewhere, someone wouldn't be shocked.
Yep, this is something that South Platte Water Renewal Partners, we actually started participating in, and I'll tell you where it came from. I was on a Sunday reading on my iPhone, and I saw a popular mechanics article that talked about this BioBot study. And I came in on Monday, and I talked to one of my staff members and said, hey, can you look into this? And got in touch with them. And what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to correlate wastewater through sampling to COVID outbreaks. And so they test the level of RNA of coronavirus in the wastewater, and then try and correlate that to the number of infected members of the community. And so there's a number of front range entities that are supplying information for this. Our whole approach on this is we see it as something that we think that it makes more sense to understand from a trends perspective, as opposed to what that information that I saw today, Mayor, was a little more specific, which was not what I was understanding the approach to be. I think people are running with specific data points, and really I think the program itself is trying to establish broader trends. BioBot actually originated by doing work. They were trying to establish an understanding of opioid use in the community by sampling wastewater, and they've shifted to this coronavirus analysis. So really, from our perspective, is we want to help as a public organization to get data out there to try and help see if there's any way that we can further assist in solving this larger pandemic. But I share your concerns about what the methodology for how they're concluding their results are, because I don't know that I think there might be some broadly drawn conclusions from that. I think ultimately, if you step back to pure science, we think it's a great thing to potentially help contribute to understanding the pandemic as a whole. You can only do, people are going to do, and organizations will utilize information to the way that they want to. We right now we are participants to try and help.
Makes sense.
Councilmember Wink has her hand up.
I took it back down, Lorraine. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd also add that we did actually also get a call from the Colorado Sun, because they're doing an article on this, because apparently there's some other wastewater facilities, I think on the West Slope, that are participating in BioBot. And Metro Wastewater, which is the largest wastewater provider on the Front Range, is also participating. And so we were interviewed for an article, so you might see us referenced in just an article relative to BioBot as well.
Okay. Lorraine, does anybody else have any questions?
Not at this time, Mr. Wiggins.
All right, if nobody has anything else at this time, I thank everybody for participating, and I'll call this meeting into adjournment, and we'll see you next month on Zoom, I assume.
Great.
Take care, wash your hands.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Shut us off here.